And obviously Skip said some stuff last week that I didn't want to bring it up because I don't want to acknowledge it, and I didn't want to pretend like it was and based on anything that was reality. But that's the way he's chosen to live and be his brand. So go with it, man.
The Fred Minnick Show is brought to you by Manscaped. Enter Smooth Fred to save 20% at checkout. By the Beeline, Michter's, and 291 Colorado Whiskey.
And joining me on the Beeline hotline, it's kind of fun saying that because you're always saying that, you've got a sponsor that you always have to say someone's coming in on, but go to visityoursippingpoint.com. That's a place where you go to Northern Kentucky and find out all their bourbon bars. But what's it like being on the other end? Because you're always interviewing people. You don't give out a lot of interviews. The bourbon helps, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's fun. It is always strange though. Like last summer, I went on Rich Eisen's show, and it was weird sitting in the guest chair. Like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be, and you're there, and it's it is a little sometimes off-putting, but it's good to be here and great to talk to you, Fred.
Well, my guest, of course, today is Trey Wingo. Has had an incredible sportscasting career, and my love for sports has always put me on ESPN. Day and night, and Trey, you've been one of my favorite people to listen to over the years, and you just got you've got such a smooth delivery, such a calm, always like conversational style. It's just always been fun to listen to you.
I appreciate that, and the liquor helps. So that's a big part of it.
Well,
never on the air. I'm kidding. But obviously, where I'm set up in my basement bar, yes, we can have that conversation.
Now, was there a hiding spot at ESPN that you could keep a little bourbon?
No. Ixnay on that at all. Never happened. Don't know what you're talking about.
Well, when I had Golic on here, he did say that if there was a good bottle of bourbon and someone stole it, that you would be everybody's number one suspect.
I think that's fair. I mean, I tend to post a fair amount of pics out by the fire pit with a nice glass filled with one or two things, and I think he referenced that when he was on the show. So I'll happily wear that badge.
So tell me about your sipping background. Everybody knows about your sports side, but how did you get into the finer alcohols of life?
Like anybody else, if you do something long enough, you're going to want to try and do different things, and so. We enjoy those little things that sometimes get overlooked when you're not sipping, for lack of a better term. And there are real intricacies and real differences in the way so many of these liquors are made, that there are subtle nuances to them, very much like wines, that give it a bunch of different flavors and tastes. And the presentation and the aroma and the whole thing makes it a more enjoyable experience.
And you've got quite the back bar there. Do you have a favorite section of the bar?
Wherever there's a full bottle. No, I do. Look, I do enjoy making sure. Like, we built this house 6 years ago, and we wanted to make it an adult party house because the kids were grown and out of college. So we wanted to make it a place where A, they would want to come back and hang out, and B, where we could have a really good time. And so we went. When we were building the house, I went to this place called the Soho House Hotel in Chicago, and they had this unbelievable bar up there. And I said, you know what? I want a bar like that. So I took a picture of the bar, brought it home, and gave it to our builder, and he did a great job sort of recreating what the atmosphere was like at the Soho House Hotel in Chicago.
Yeah, that's a great hotel. That's a great little spot there. And it looks like to your left, behind you, to your left is where you're keeping the bourbon there. I see a little Knob Creek and some Woodford Reserve. What else you got? Some Basil Hayden?
Basil Hayden there. We also have some Glenmorangie and a bunch of other stuff over there that's hiding. Heritage Hills, I think, is over there as well. And we got a little Bullet as well. That might be in the upstairs bar, though. That's right. There's one bar.
More than one bar. And then in the bedroom, he's got the desk whiskey and...
That's more like the liquor cabinet than a bar. That's just for handy use,
Well, I sent you some. One of the things that I sent you is one of the whiskey contenders of the year right now, and that's my the old Fitzgerald 14-year-old bottle in the bond.
right there.
That's it. Let's start with that one.
Okay.
So this is a brand that was actually kind of became famous when Pappy Van Winkle owned it.
Pappy Van Winkle?
Yeah, Pappy Van Winkle was a real person.
Okay.
And he owned this brand for a good chunk of time at his family distillery called Stitzel Weller.
Okay.
It then was, Pappy died in the mid 1960s. His kids and his other owners ended up selling the distillery in 1972, and it ended up in a lot of mergers and acquisitions over the years. And in the 90s, the company that owned it then, United Distillers, started selling off the brands. And a company called Heaven Hill purchased Old Fitzgerald, and they started making a similar recipe as to what they were making at Stitzel Weller. And this is what we would call a wheated bourbon. So most bourbons, to be bourbon, it has to be majority corn.
Right.
And then, they can put any kind of grain they want into, like whether it's oats or triticale, but most people are doing rye or wheat and barley. And then they'll distill it and put it in a new charred oak barrel. So this would be kind of like in that sub-designation of a wheated bourbon. And this is people who like these, these styles of bourbons, tend to really like really powerful, strong caramel notes. So this is, since you are an everyday sipper, cheers to you, my friend, and
Cheers.
Thanks for coming on.
Happy to do it.
Now, I don't know if you how you taste, but when you smell it with your mouth open. By smelling it with your mouth open, you'll actually pick up more than just the alcohol fumes.
Yep, I can see that.
What are you picking up? What are you picking up in it?
Not quite sure actually. Is there a little oaky in there?
Like the toasting of oak, just like the starting
Right.
of like a little bit of a fire there. Definitely.
It's interesting you say that. I've never really tried to sniff with my mouth open before, and now it's all that I can think about is, am I doing that correctly?
You just do it just a little bit, like just open it a little bit and go back and forth on your nose. Your nostrils, every nostril will smell differently.
Right.
Inevitably, one might be a little bit more receptive than the other.
Gotcha.
So you definitely can pick up, you can pick up more on one nostril than the other. It's a very interesting, science. There are people who study the genetics of smelling and tasting. Happens more in Sweden than the United States for some reason, but they've got all of this data that shows that the way you smell and taste is really, it's genetics, just like being an athlete. And so
I was about to say, it sounds very much like an analytics department from a baseball team.
Exactly.
So
unfortunately, there's not a fantasy tasters league, but
if there was, you'd be living that life right now, my friend.
If I was, I'd probably be the
Okay,
I'd like to think I wouldn't be a first round bust, but never know.
That was a really interesting sort of secondary wave of flavor that I got there.
What are you picking up?
I wish I could be as subtle, as nuanced as you in this, but I want to taste that again. Because there's a distinct flavor to start, and then a second sort of flavor takes over. That's really fascinating. This is the old Fitzgerald.
This is Old Fitzgerald, and I'll tell you, it's a bit of a caramel bomb, and then you do get some banana. I get some bananas here, and I get a little bit of vanilla, but there's more to it than that. But
definitely the vanilla. I can definitely taste the vanilla. By the way, on the story you told me about this, I think it's clear that we don't have enough Pappies anymore, right? I feel like, right? I mean, I feel like a Pappy had to be someone that was in the 50s or 60s. I feel like we need more Pappies.
Yeah, well, his Pappy was like so common in the South, and then it started kind of getting, thrown out. And I think there was, like right now, we have a lot of unique names coming out, and the tried and true names that keep on going are Fred and Trey. I'll tell you right now, they.
Yeah. I'll tell you a funny story about that, right? Like I grew up, my parents are both from Texas, but I grew up in the Northeast and was born in New York City, grew up in Connecticut. And I went to school in Texas. And I, through my entire first 18 years, I never met another Trey in my life. Not one. There are trips up in the Northeast, but not Treys, because Trey means three. It's a long story what my real long name is. But anyway, I went down to Baylor University in Waco, Texas, and the first week there, I met 4 other Treys. And I was like, okay, I get it now. Like, my family was from Texas, and that was a very Texas name, signifying the third. But there wasn't one growing up. And then when I went down to school in Texas, I ran into a bunch of them.
Now, you were when you were in Texas, did you study journalism? There was a broadcast journalism?
Yeah. I mean, I changed my major 5 times just to graduate. So I started out with all the best of intentions, Fred. And then, it became much more of a social experience. But I did graduate as a communications specialist. And if you ask me what that means, I'll tell you because I was going to be a speech major. And then they said, well, if you're a speech major, you need one more lab science. And then I said, well, I'm definitely not a speech major then. So that's how I graduated as a communication specialist.
And Baylor was pretty good in football back then.
They were. I mean, the arc of Baylor football is really kind of weird, right? We were terrible for many years. Then we got good in the 70s and 80s. And then we got terrible for another 2 decades. And now I think we're going to be good again. And we've been good again since. So the arc has been something very unusual. Like when I was at school, there were players, we go to a bowl game every year, and there were players drafted in the first, second round almost every year off that team. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it went away for about 2 decades, and then it came back, and Matt Rule just left, and Dave Aranda's taken over. But they just won their first game, 47-14 over Kansas over the weekend, so we're excited about that.
Yeah, I'm an Oklahoma State guy, so I'm very familiar with Baylor. And when I one of my mentors in college was actually a safety for Baylor, probably around that time, Rob McClendon, and he used to run the agricultural broadcast division at Oklahoma State. I did some shows over there, but I remember him telling me about like Mike Singletary. Like there were all these like helmets in the locker room that Mike Singletary cracked.
Shattered helmets. I think there were 14 of them in his collegiate days. Samurai Mike took down 14 helmets during his playing days at Waco.
I gotta say, I think he's probably the greatest linebacker of all time.
It's interesting, right? Because first of all, the lineage of the middle linebacker position alone for the Bears is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Butkus, Mike Singletary, Brian Urlacher. And then you get into, those between the tackle guys. And then there are the guys that are now the outside linebackers, or we consider edge rushers now, and the way they sort of attack things. I mean, Singletary did things very differently than, say, a contemporary like Lawrence Taylor would do his job. Mm-hmm. Because he was an edge linebacker or an outside linebacker, and Singletary was very much inside. But I agree. Like Singletary, he was incredible. I mean, right from the get-go when he got to the Bears, his rookie year, I mean, he announced his presence with authority. Mm-hmm. You knew right away that Mike Singletary was going to the Hall of Fame with the way he played, the intensity, the Singletary eyes. Mm-hmm. To this day. If you want to Google it or look it up on YouTube, just to see the ferocity just that came through his eyes, let alone everything else that he played with, it was pretty incredible.
And he was athletic to the point where I think his skill sets would thrive today as well, even like in a passing situation.
Agreed.
Yeah,
and he was intense. There's this great clip. NFL Films does such a great job. If you really love football, like NFL Films, it just speaks to your soul. I still hear the voice of John Facenda all the time in my head when I'm watching NFL Films, and he's been dead for decades. But there's this one clip where Mike's just saying, "All day, baby. It's an all-day kind of party. We're going to be here all day." And it's just like you can just feel it like coming through the screen still to this day. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, that is one dude I would not want to be up against on the other side.
I'd be right behind you, wishing you all the best.
Yeah. Well, let's go to the Elijah Craig Toasted Barrel.
Okay, got that one.
Now, this is a this is a new series coming out of Elijah Craig.
All right.
Now, Elijah Craig, this is, there's a lot of stories and stuff in sports, but Elijah Craig is supposedly the father of bourbon.
I have this upstairs at the other bar.
Oh, nice. So
but
this
I don't know if it's a specific one.
This is so they take the regular Elijah Craig and they put it in another barrel, that's been slightly toasted for a few additional months. But on here, on their label, they have it as the father of bourbon. It's not true. I mean, Elijah Craig was a distiller, but there's not really solid, definitive evidence that he was the father of bourbon. In one of my books, I wrote that bourbon labels have as much bullshit per square inch as a political lad. So
it's with the reliability of Wikipedia. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah. He's I'll say, like, the labels you can't trust. There's so much of bourbon's history that is really fanciful, and the folklore becomes the history, and then the history becomes the people telling the folklore. It's just. But the reason why Elijah Craig becomes a really important part to American whiskey history is that in the 1950s, bourbon was trying to export, and the world was tariffing bourbon, and they were basically trying to allow Scotch to have the upper hand, to help the United Kingdom recover from World War II.
Right.
And people were saying, like, bourbon is not unique. There's nothing special about it. And so there was this big effort to make bourbon a unique product to the United States, and it finally happened in 1964, in large part because JFK made it a priority to work on exports. But, so now to this day, you can't make bourbon anywhere else in the world, and, and they used the Elijah Craig story because it made it sound very American. He was a Baptist minister. They said he invented bourbon on the same day that George Washington got inaugurated. It was just
that I got to say, that's kind of funny, having gone to a Southern Baptist school at Baylor University, that a Baptist preacher made bourbon, because ixnay on that. Promise you that. Well, on campus,
it's funny. Like all of these hardcore religions have distillers in their DNA. Like the Mormon Church, which I don't think you can get any more temperance than the Mormons. Brigham Young was a distiller. Their high priests in the 1800s were all whiskey dealers. I mean, they peddled the good stuff.
Now, I'm fascinated on your front how you got into this and how you created this, because I listen, obviously you're doing very well, and like you said, you did some journalism work at school. When did it become for you? And here I am doing the thing that I normally do. I'm now interviewing you in college. But I find this fascinating. How did you create this path?
Well, I graduated Oklahoma State with a degree in agricultural communications. At the time,
wow, that is really good, by the way.
Kind of like it's got some of that toasted oak notes there that you liked earlier, like a little bit of a marshmallow, kind of like a marshmallow over an open fire.
That is really sweet.
So I, at the time, I was writing for the Daily Oklahoman in the sports department, and I was their copy editor. And and I don't think I've really talked about this much, but there were two copy editors at the Daily Oklahoman who were Oklahoma State journalism students. Myself and Josh Crutchmeyer, who is now the art director for the New York Times.
Wow.
And Barry Trammell, the legendary columnist for the Daily Oklahoman, wrote a column after we left saying, like, how we were the two best copy editors he ever had. I thought he was just blowing smoke up our ass. But I decided to get out of sports because a couple things, like the Oklahoma State plane crash weighed very heavy on me. And I didn't always like how athletes were. Athletes sometimes had like this kind of bravado, like they thought they were better than the people asking questions, kind of thing, and that bugged me. And so I decided to like take kind of my journalistic skills to like science. Like I started writing about. I became a tech writer in forestry, and at the same time, I was in the Army National Guard. That's how I paid for college. And 9/11 happens. I get sent to Iraq. You know, that whole forestry thing was great, but it didn't last. Obviously, I got sent to Iraq as an Army journalist, and so I was doing like basically combat photography in Iraq, and it just was when I got back. I tried to go back to Iraq as like an AP, reporter or a Gannett reporter, but they were like, "You're too close. Like you can't go back. You were a soldier." And looking back, that makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
And so the only job I could get was a food editor, and at the time I didn't know the difference between ranch dressing and balsamic vinaigrette. So my palate and understanding of food was not high, but I did drink a lot of bourbon. And when you write about food, you eventually write about bourbon.
Sure.
And I just started writing about it and kept writing about it and learning and applying some techniques and tasting. And it just took off. And
that's very cool.
Now here I am with one of my heroes in sports media. So cheers.
Well, I appreciate it. That's a great story. Cheers to you. That's great.
So you've had an amazing career. Tell me about your story. How did you get to the worldwide leader of sports?
Well, it's interesting. When I was in college, ESPN was just starting, and I don't know how many people know this, but like ESPN was never supposed to be what it is now. The guy who founded the company was a guy named Bill Rasmussen, who was a University of Connecticut grad, and all he wanted to do was to create a local cable station in Connecticut where he could broadcast, UConn sports, basketball, soccer, football, hockey, whatever. So he found the cheapest land he could find, Bristol, Connecticut. And having grown up and spent a large part of my life in Connecticut, I can tell you that is correct. Bristol would be the cheapest land you could find in the late 70s. And he went to start buying time on the satellite. And he was inquiring about what does it cost to do this for there. And the guy said, no, you're not getting it. It costs the same. You're just buying a time on the bird, is what they call the satellite. You're just buying time on the bird. Where you send it is irrelevant. And he's like, wait a minute. So you're telling me for the time on the satellite, I could send things from New York to Los Angeles for the same price, essentially, as sending it from Greenwich to New London, Connecticut? And he was like, yeah. And he's like, well, maybe we should do that. And that's how it all started. So, ESPN really was never supposed to be the worldwide leader in sports. It was just going to be a Connecticut cable station. And, from a very simple idea came a monolith, for lack of a better term, all these years later. I think we just celebrated our 41st or 42nd anniversary on September 7th. September 7th, 1979 was the day the station launched. So my early days in college were the first few years of ESPN. And I was like, what is this? Because it was Australian rules football and, slow pitch softball and all that kind of stuff. But then it sort of caught on and everyone started, obviously watching it and was on all the cable packages. And I thought it would be kind of cool to do that. So I got a job in Binghamton, New York. That was my first on-air job in the late 80s. And I was there for 2 years. And then I got a job in Allentown, Pennsylvania, where I was not only the local sportscaster, but I did some play-by-play for Lehigh University basketball and football. But I was only there 9 months, and then I got a job in St. Louis, Missouri. So to make a long story short, and I apologize for dragging this out, I was there less than 6 months, and I got a note before we had computers and email, all kind of stuff. It was a notepad. It said, hey, call this guy, Al Jaffe, blah, blah, blah. Well, growing up in Connecticut, I knew that 203 was the Connecticut area code. So I'm like, why is someone from Connecticut calling me? And as I'm calling the number, I'm like, Al Jaffe, I know this name. Why do I know this name? He was the talent recruiter for ESPN. I had never sent them a tape. Somebody else had sent them a tape. I didn't have an agent at this time, so someone had forwarded a tape to Al Jaffe, or maybe he'd been in St. Louis at some time and seen something I did. And so within a year of me being in St. Louis, they offered me a job, but they said, if you're under contract, your station has to agree to let you come for the interview. And my station wouldn't let me, because I was under contract. So it took a few years, but a few years later, they called again, and we had a window, and I got to ESPN in 97. That was November 1st, 1997, and we're almost 23 years later.
Wow. And it's changed so much since then.
Amazing, yeah. I mean, ESPN, I said this once like 12 years ago, and people thought I was crazy. Like, when ESPN started, you could hide from the police on ESPN, right? I mean, it was the definition of a mom and pop startup. It was like a blog that turned into whatever it's turned into now, the worldwide leader. So, I think that the hard part for ESPN in its transition from being, hey, look at us, we're different, to being the all-encompassing thing was, how do you manage that transition?
Yeah.
And it's something it's always continuing, because the industry is changing so fastly. Everything's digital now. What we're doing, and ESPN Plus and Disney Plus. That's the wave of the future. So you're trying to incorporate all that and still make sure you can watch sports on television, because I think live sports is what keeps television afloat. Quite frankly, there are communal events like we can do this on an iPad or your iPhone, however you want to do it. But when a game is going on, especially a big game, an important game, well, you want to have that thing on your massive TV with as many people as you can in a COVID-friendly environment, have around you watching that. And I think that's the thing that keeps, honestly, a lot of television afloat right now.
Well, there's a big game tonight, of course, and Baltimore versus Kansas City, and living in Louisville, and Lamar is like one of the. I'm so glad that the world got to meet him and see him, because he's an amazing human being. Like,
sure is.
Our community just loves him. And what are the things that I find? I'm watching and I listen to a lot of sports media and everything, and I find that people can be really, really mean, like toward the athletes. And you're never that way, but where does that come from with some people? They're just so mean.
I don't know. Look, there's a million voices out there, and sometimes if you shout, whether the squeaky wheel gets the oil, or that's one theory. But especially in social media, where everybody has a platform to say whatever they want, which I guess is a good thing, but sometimes I wonder if it is really. Twitter can be an amazing tool, or just a tool, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And I don't know. My thing has always been, I don't want to predict. I don't want to tell you what I think. I want to watch it and experience it and analyze it. That's the way I've always approached it. Like, I don't want to, well, I think this is going to happen. Well, I mean, it may, but I mean, all of that to me is based on doing your homework, doing your research, putting in the time, watching the film, watching the games, getting the information, getting the data, and then seeing how it all plays out. I've never been a guy just to scream at people. That's just not who I am. That's not who I ever want to be. But there are a lot of people that do it, and there are a lot of people that do it, quite frankly, and they're very successul at it.
I mean, you definitely do see in the last 5 years. Like, I remember watching Skip Bayless and Stephen A. Smith, and I would alter my schedule around that. At first.
Well, look, it's not for everybody, and I get it. And obviously, Skip said some stuff last week that I didn't want to bring it up because I don't want to acknowledge it, and I didn't want to pretend like it was based in anything that was reality. But that's the way he's chosen to live and be his brand. So go with it, man.
Well, Tebow's not playing anymore, so
Exactly. Give me something else.
Yeah, but this is this is obviously we're here to talk a lot about sports, but also whiskey. And the next one I'm going to take you to is Four Roses. Now, Four Roses is the one you've got is this year's limited edition small batch. So it's 2020. It's on my list for best whiskeys of the year. And I poured you my last drops of it. So
wow.
You have the last of it. So I don't even have this myself. So I'm pouring a little bit from 2014. Now, Four Roses has it's a bourbon, but they use an incredible amount of rye in their recipe. As you may recall, I said Old Fitzgerald uses wheat, and when you put a lot of rye in a recipe, it tends to yield an extremely high spice. So with Four Roses, you typically get a lot of baking spices, like a cinnamon or a nutmeg, maybe a cardamom.
Definitely taste both of those in this one. Absolutely. Wow, that's good. I feel bad that I'm not sharing it with you.
Well, I am sipping on something that's pretty daggum good. The 2014 single barrel is pretty good.
I think you're going to be okay. You said this is on your running for best whiskey, huh?
Yep. It's in the running for best whiskey of the year.
Wow. That's really good.
And in fact, that's the first time I've mentioned that, I think, on the I usually yeah. Ba-ba-bum.
I'm going to have another sip of this one.
Yeah, that is. I mean, Four Roses just always hits a spot. The interesting story about them, they were owned by Seagram's. Seagram's acquired them in the 1940s, and in the 1950s they took them off the U.S. market. It was a business plan that they wanted to focus on a little brand called Crown Royal, and instead of Four Roses, and so they started selling Four Roses bourbon overseas, and then created a label here in the United States, a Four Roses blend that was like a rot gut blend, but all the while, like in Spain and France and Japan, you could buy the actual bourbon, but the distillers in Kentucky and the people who made it could never access the bourbon. They'd have to go overseas to buy it. And it comes back. Seagram's goes out of business. The grandson tries to get in the movie business and just fails miserably, ends up selling the company. And a Japanese brand called Kirin, which you know them for Kirin beer, they acquired Four Roses. So this is owned by Japan, and they brought bourbon back in to the United States, and they've been on a good 20-year run of excellence since.
Well, you mentioned Kirin. Now I have to tell you this story, and just shows you how things have changed over time. When I was a senior in high school, we had an English department teacher who asked us to write our essay about something that we really enjoy. And one of my friends in high school wrote it about his favorite beers. Granted, he was 17 at the time when this was going on. So that was when the drinking age was actually 18. We hadn't even gotten there yet. And he wrote it, and he said, my personal favorite, I like to sit back with a nice frosty Kirin. Now, if you had written that today as an 18-year-old, when the legal drinking age is 21, all hell would break loose. I think he got an A on the paper. So shout out to my friend John B., whose last name I will keep quiet. But when you said Kirin, that's the first thing I thought of, that English paper.
That's awesome. I love that story because, you could drink at 18 during that time. And, as a country, we struggle with consumption of alcohol. People
Correct.
either drink way too much, or not at all. It's like two extremes. And I believe that if you sip and you're responsible, we can have good lives.
Well, it's interesting along those lines, Fred, because there is no drinking age in most of Europe, and in Germany, the Autobahn has no speed limit, and their incidence of drunk driving and deaths per capita compared to a much larger country in the United States are significantly less because of the things you just mentioned. I think a lot of people understand, hey, this is part of our culture. This is who we are. We're going to show you how to do this responsibly, and it's not considered taboo, so it's not some sort of hidden forbidden fruit that you can't get to, but it's something that they sort of grow up with, and they understand with it from a very young age, and then it doesn't become this woohoo Vegas kind of situation. It's just something that's part of how they live, and I think it speaks to what you were just talking about.
It's interesting. We were founded as people who are trying to get away from religious persecution as a country. on that side, and
Sure.
they essentially bring their own level of religious persecution with them.
Right.
Just a different style.
You're right.
And then alcohol has been used as a weapon too. Like it was used against the tribes and wars against the tribes. So
Right.
there's been a lot of bad associations when it comes to whiskey with our country.
Sure.
And I don't know if we'll ever get I don't know if we'll ever get away from it. I really don't.
Yeah. Well, it would be something that would be very difficult to try and change at this point. But I hear what you're saying, and I think about that a lot because, pre-COVID, we used to spend a lot of summers overseas, and it was interesting to see how different cultures, whether it was Italy, Germany, Spain, South America, how they treated things differently than the way we look at it here.
Yeah. And then when alcohol gets involved in sports, I think of like the Boston Red Sox with the beer in the locker room. It's like it's very rarely a good story,
Yeah. Well, when I was in St. Louis, the brewery ran the Cardinals, and there was a tap in the locker room, in the clubhouse right after the game. So it was always there. And I think that obviously, like you said, from some of the situations that came up in Boston and other places, they actually had to sort of curtail that. But again, it goes back to where are we on the moderation level, right?
Yeah. Now you're starting to see players. The NFL used to have a ban on players endorsing alcohol products, and since that's been lifted, you're starting to see players get more involved. Like Ndamukong Suh owns a piece of a distillery, although he's no longer in the league.
Right.
Peyton Manning has his own bourbon.
Yep, he's at Sweet Cove, right? Isn't it part of Sweet?
Yep, it's pretty good, by the way. It's pretty good.
I've heard it's fantastic. I have not yet sampled it, but I've heard it's good.
I'll send you a bottle after this.
Oh,
I'll send you a bottle. I should have sent you one for this, but I think our next one is Knob Creek.
Correct.
And that one, I did not send you the last of it, but
we'll share this one.
But I can't find. I don't know where my Knob Creek Rye is. We have a.
Well, you have a bunch back there, so.
Yeah. I got your lot mixed up with someone else's, and right. I think that's what happened here. But also, my wife comes into the office and occasionally steals products, and she's a big fan of Knob Creek.
I'm staying away from that one. Just tell you that. I'll let you guys work that
out. There's a long history of like she will take some of my like really rare and allocated bourbons and turn them into a whiskey sour.
Oh wow!
In like 1 year, like it was my whiskey of the year. It was Booker's Rye, $300. I mean, now you can't find it for anything less than $1,200, maybe $800 if the people don't know about it. And she finished it off with freaking whiskey sours,
Not great. Okay, this is a fascinating scent to this one.
So this is a rye whiskey.
Do I smell a little peppermint in there?
You could very well. Rye expresses itself often as as herbs.
Yeah.
It's killing me. I'm trying to find this bottle to sip with you, but it's just I'm going to have to go with another rye. I'm letting you down, Trey. I'm letting you down.
All good here. Trust me.
So, so you're looking at a category that is rye, which rye is coming from the Dakotas or Canada or Europe, and it has to be at least 51% rye. And the Knob Creek Rye is a real herbal, spicy.
Yeah, it definitely is giving that flavor.
Whereas mine, the only one I had within my reach was the Templeton Rye, which is distilled in Indiana and bottled in Iowa. It smells like a dill pickle with the bit of plastic.
Dill pickle with a bit of plastic. I did not see that combination.
Yeah, I don't recommend this one. You definitely have You have the better end of the two, my friend.
Now, this one definitely doesn't taste plasticky, but those spices that you're talking about, they really pop in this one. And it's interesting that you say that, because I did. The first thing I thought of was I really thought I got a scent of peppermint.
That's fantastic. You know, peppermint is a common note in rye, so
that's really good.
What's been your favorite so far?
You know, I think the most distinctive was the peppermint coming from this. What was this last one? Knob Creek.
Yeah, Knob Creek Rye.
But I think the overall flavorful and smoothness of the Elijah Craig might be my favorite.
Nice. Yeah, Elijah. This toasted barrel. This is a new one on the market. It's been really welcomed by a lot of folks. So
Gotcha.
You might be able to find this in your local liquor store. Where do you have a place? You have a honey hole where you shop?
There's a couple of them. It's interesting. In our little town in northwestern Connecticut, the two things that always seem to pop up are another bank and another liquor store. I'm not sure what they're trying to tell us, but we definitely never run out of shopping options. But there's a couple of them specifically pretty close that we hit on a pretty regular basis.
So what's next for you? Golic and Wingo was I was sad to see that go, and I really enjoyed that, waking up with you and watching you all. It was just a fantastic show.
I appreciate that. That there are things that I can say and things that I can't say. So I guess I'll the only thing I really can say is that, you know, I'm still under contract with ESPN, and we're working on some things, and there are some other things in play, and we'll see what happens.
I understand that all too well and respect it for sure. But your time with the Golics, I'd love to kind of shift it over there a little bit and focus on, like, who had the better punchlines, Golic or Golic Jr.?
Well, it's interesting because Mike and I have known each other, you know, for years. We got to ESPN within a year of each other. We live in the same town in Connecticut. Literally, our houses, I think, are 1.5 miles apart. And our sons were a couple of years apart. I think Junior's 3 years older, maybe 4, than my son. And they all came up through the same, Pee Wee football program here in town. And, of course, he went on to play at Notre Dame. My son went on to play college football at Georgetown University in D.C. And so, you know, Mike, the first week of NFL Live, when NFL Live started in 2003, Mike did the show. And so for us, it was just sort of a different way to do the same thing we've been doing forever. And then when Junior got into the mix, it was funny because I remembered him as like, hey, you're the little roly-poly guy from the Mudhogs football team, you know, and to see him this way, it's great. And Junior was great with us because he kept us centered and kept us without sounding like a bunch of old idiots. And I really did enjoy that. He was a really good counterpuncher for us. And he's doing really, really well right now. And I'm really happy to see it. It's his birthday today, actually. So cheers to Michael.
Yeah, cheers. Send him a text. And you had like you've had to, you know, navigate the sports world right now, which it's a very different time. There's a lot of activism going on. There's a lot of restrictions with COVID.
Yep.
I mean, what's it like? What's it like to be covering sports right now?
Well, it's interesting because, first of all, there was I remember the day it all shut down on March 11th or 12th when the NBA stopped and then the NHL stopped and baseball stopped. And everything just hit a hard pause. But the NCAA tournament stopped, and it was like, all right, well, what's going on here? How long is this going to be? And none of us had any idea at the time. And then the only thing that really went on as scheduled was NFL free agency. And there was all this sort of big discussion, well, should they be doing it? Should they not be doing it? And my thing was like, look, it's basically business transactions. They're not playing. They're not lining up against anybody. So they absolutely should do it. And there was nothing going on for the longest time. And then that was right before the NFL draft, which, of course, was 3 days in the end of April. And when the draft hit, I felt like everybody was just dying to watch something, you know. And it was weird. We had a whole setup, Fred, in Las Vegas for the draft. We were going to do it in front of the mountains at Caesar's Palace, with these red carpets right there going over to the next door casino where we were going to be. And the stage was going to be there. It was this elaborate setup. And in a matter of 53 days from when that thing was almost put to bed, they changed everything. We did the draft from Bristol over 3 days. I was the only one in the studio. All the analysts were remote. All the players were remote at their setups. We had all 32 teams, head coaches, GMs, and owners wired up from wherever they were going to be. And it was really an unbelievable testament to the agility and the dexterity of everybody at ESPN to pull that thing together. And it had a record audience. And it was like we had 56 million viewers over the 3 days, all collected, which was just, next year's draft those numbers will never be seen again. I feel bad for how we're going to have to spend next year's draft because it just won't be like that. But, it was just, I felt like it was something that everybody just needed, and then things sort of started to come back. And then, obviously the activism has been a big part of this. And you hear a lot of, well, they should just stick to sports and all that kind of stuff. But, politics have always been in sports. I mean, President Nixon called a play for the Washington, then the Redskins, now the football team, in 1972 in their Super Bowl. So I think the unusual part of this has been players finding their voice and not being afraid to share that voice. And what's really been interesting to me is how quickly college athletes, specifically college football players, have found that they have more power than they ever thought they had. The coach was the rule, the coach was the law, the coach was the beginning and the end, the alpha and the omega. That's it. And you just did what he said. Well, now players are realizing there's so much money at stake. And, what we think matters too. And, we've had a couple instances this summer where the players checked a coach. Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State, Mike Norvell at Florida State. I mean, the coaches now realize with the platforms that these players have, and people are very interested in hearing what they have to say, it's never going to be that way again. You have to walk a very fine line. I think that's been the really interesting part of this whole process for me is how quickly it went from the authoritarian rule to you need to listen to us because without us, you can't get this done. And I'm not sure that's a bad thing. I think we just need to find some sort of common medium where we can all work together. And I think we're all doing that sort of in real time right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think he put that very, very, very strongly. And it's and there's been a lot of power, come from it. A lot of people I think have come to the forefront as leaders in communities. We see it here in Louisville with the U of L basketball team, and it's really something. And I hate it when people say stick to football, or stick to basketball. Yeah. I just think that undermines people's citizenship and the fact they're human.
Yeah, I agree. And Fred, the hard part is I think for so many sports fans, the way I explain it, you want to see your athletes on the TV or on the field doing their thing. And I equate it to when you were a kid, let's say you were in 5th grade, and you went somewhere and you saw your teacher. And you're like, wait a minute, you're supposed to be at the school. You're my teacher. You don't do this. You're the teacher. I go to the school, you're there, and that's where I interact with you. And, that's when you realize, oh, wow, teachers actually have lives. They do different things and they do things away from their place of work just like everybody else. And I think a lot of people think that way about, their sports teams and their athletes. I turn on the TV and you're there, you're doing the thing in the uniform, and that's all I care about. And that's fine if that's what you want, but that's not who they are. They're actual people. And, when I've always done the draft, I've tried to say, look, I'm going to explain this as if they're human beings, not as if they're widgets, because you're not buying a product this product is old and defective. We're going to remove him from the lineup. We're going to get this young, new, effective product and put him in the lineup. You are, but that effective product is not just a product. It's not an inanimate object. It's a real person with real feelings and real stories and real backgrounds that are going to be shared now in the world we live in. I think that's been a very difficult adjustment, I think, for a lot of people.
Well, I tell you what what has been a difficult adjustment for me as well is miss seeing you on Wingo and Golic or Golic and Wingo every day, and it's been a pleasure to have you here for the brief moment to sip a little whiskey with you. Glad to hear that you're such a whiskey fan. I hope I'll send you some more, and hopefully this won't be the last time we toast. Hopefully the next time it's in person.
That would be great, Fred. Cheers to you, my friend.
Cheers to you. We got a game to go watch. Speaking of Lamar, okay.
Big one.
Big game. I can't wait. So, Trey, it's such a pleasure to have you on. Like I said, I've looked up to you for a long time. You're a great interviewer, even-keeled guy. Just it makes my heart feel good to know that you're a whiskey drinker. So, be safe out there, my friend.
You too, and kudos to your journey. I was fascinated to learn about that. That was great. Thanks for sharing that.
I appreciate that. Cheers and be safe.
You too.
Also, vodka sucks.